This is Coda Radio, episode 33 for January 21st, 2013. Hi everyone, you're listening to Coda Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show, taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and related technologies. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, Mr. Michael Dominic. Hey there, Michael.
Oh boy!
It's a Michael!
That was supposed to be Mickey. So every time you play the intro song, I see Mickey in a fur coat.
Is that where this comes from?
I think so, right? An old 1960s Cadillac with hydraulics.
Because we've actually been chatting for like a half hour on the pre-show, and Mickey Mouse and Mario haven't come up at all. But sometimes, I gotta be honest with you, your Mickey, and maybe this isn't your fault, maybe this is Skype's fault, but your Mickey comes off a little Mario.
I think they might be the same person, like Mickey rips off his mask.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
That'd be sort of amazing, really. You know, we should rip off the mask of this episode, maybe tease a little bit what's coming up. What are we talking about today?
All right, we are talking about launching a project. And what I mean by launch, I of course mean deployment. Yes, because I was inspired by a war story we got this morning.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
But we should start with the feedback.
As always. All right, what is our first bit of feedback today?
So someone who signed his email, new coder, which is very descriptive. I like that.
Yeah.
2 words. It's a name and a description.
And you kind of get a gist. Maybe he might be new.
He might be.
I get that sense.
So he wants to know when he would be considered to, quote, know a language. So my answer to that is, I don't know. I don't know any languages. It's all about the docs, man. You're still going to be using documentation, right? APIs change, languages change. Yeah, I would not worry about this question too much. I just figured I'd answer it because he seemed very concerned.
Hung up on it?
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, and I guess maybe he just wants to know when he can feel like it's safe to let off on research, maybe?
I would say never, because I still do tons of research. I mean, Grey Wolf says when you can write a non-trivial program. Fair enough. To me, the question's kind of arbitrary anyway, right?
It's going to be different for everybody.
I've been writing Objective-C for a long, long time, and I still have to look up the docs every time they change something.
Right.
And the languages do change, so... you're never going to get to a point where you can absolutely never, ever have to, keep yourself sharp. Unless you're still writing VB6, but...
Which, I mean, hey, another great reason, as we always say here on the show.
It's another to write VB6.
It's another day, another reason.
All right, so Chris, Luke has something for you to ask.
Oh, all right. He says, is Darth really my father? No, okay, sorry, I couldn't help it.
It doesn't seem possible.
Why would he cut off my hand? All right, he writes, how is it you come to figure out the right tools, like languages, for the right job? And once you do that, what is the anticipated study time that needs to go into learning to use the language well enough to feel like you can actually do what you've set out to do?
Okay, so for the second part of that question, I'll refer you to the last answer. Now, for figuring out the right language for the job, we've never directly touched on this, which is strange. And I think this varies a lot between developers, but there's usually more than one right answer, and it's often better to go with the language you're more familiar with.
Right.
If it's a production or a client type thing.
That's always my answer when somebody says, hey, they write into TechSnap and they say, hey, I've been a Linux admin for 8 years, and I really want to try out FreeBSD and ZFS. Do you think I should make the leap? But our deadline is in 2 weeks, and we have to get it done right now, make sure it works the first time. And I say, you got to go with what you're familiar with, because if something breaks, you have to kind of be able to recover from that. And if you're in a completely new territory, that can leave you in sort of a lurch.
Yeah, and that's what I would say. I mean, also, you're asking languages, but often the frameworks matter more than the languages. So let's say you know Java. That doesn't mean you have to develop everything in like Java 2E, right? Yeah, there's Java Play, which is awesome. And there's a number of other things you could do, JRuby, JPython, Grails off the top of my head. So I would, now having said that, I don't know that I would necessarily jump to a whole new platform for a new project where I was accountable to somebody. that seems
Hmm.
bad.
Hmm.
Yeah, and also you could Google around. I mean, there's a lot of tribalism around languages, but as long as you're not doing something really silly like VB6, you should be fine. Okay, so Eric writes in to share a development contest. Now, I was a little reluctant about putting this in.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you'd be all down for a contest. Don't you like to dominate people, like with like coding skills of like Thor?
True,
I
true.
mean, right? That kind of sounds like your thing.
I just bring the hammer down.
Right? Yeah, exactly. See, you're with me.
So the reason I was hesitant to put this in, well, first of all, it's high level overview. Some organization, New York, a health organization, needs a portal. They're taking submissions. The winner gets, I think it's like $25,000. The problem is with any of these contests, you really have to read the terms. I'll give you a great example. Atari did a contest a while back for indie game developers that if you won, they would publish your game and give you a bag of money. However, some folks didn't read the terms, and in the terms, even if you lost, your submission and your game and your IP were their property.
Ouch.
That's why I'm always hesitant of these contests.
I gotcha.
Because usually they're really a way for someone to get more work than, for less money, right?
That's so sneaky.
Yeah. In an Atari's case, the way it was phrased, they own the IPs and could publish your game later or a modified version of it.
So if they just like the concept and idea but think they can do a better job of coding it or something like that.
So I'm always hesitant about these kind of things, but
well, in long term, you know how that worked out for Atari. Atari US actually filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy today. So,
ooh.
I mean,
oh, that's rough.
a once powerhouse in the industry.
Yeah, but they have a weird history, which we probably don't have time to go into, but they only existed in name for how many years?
Yeah, right.
Were they owned by a French company who just slapped their name on a bunch of stuff?
And then got bought out and was sold and
bought back. Yep.
Yeah, bought back, yep. Yeah, so
the mighty have fallen.
But I follow what you're saying.
It's all about ColecoVision, by the way.
It's just waiting to make its return.
It's waiting. Hey, Commodore came back.
That's true, right?
True. You could buy it. You could go online right now and buy a Commodore machine with Ubuntu on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Hayden wants to know what I think of Java FX 2.0.
Is this like what is Java FX? Is this something?
So Java FX is strange.
Okay.
The original Java FX was envisioned as a Silverlight flash killer.
Oh, okay.
And then the world changed
to HTML5 or what?
To not using these plugins, right?
Yeah.
So Java FX is now more of a higher. It's intended to be more of like a higher performance GUI Java kit.
Oh, okay.
And I haven't looked into it too deeply, but I did take a look at some of their videos and their documentation for the 2.0. It's very different from what it used to be. It looks very impressive, but I haven't used it myself. And I'd be curious to see if anyone in the community has used it and if they have anything live running on it.
Oh, email us coderradio@jupiterbroadcasting.com.
Because this seems like a nice, if you're big into Java, this seems like something would at least be worth an evaluation period.
It's Java FX. And
my only concern would be like this project has changed a few times already.
Well, and and see, and you don't have any real issue with Java, but I maintain there's a stank on the Java name now.
Well, I wrote a blog post this week.
I know.
Defending poor old Duke. If you don't know who Duke is, he's the little triangle guy, the Java logo.
Yeah.
Which we can link in the show notes. But yeah, the way it's been reported isn't really fair, right? There's nothing wrong with the language of the JVM. It's the way it was being used.
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody's reporting it's Java. Well, I guess maybe
all read Java security goal.
Well, the problem is it's in the JVM software, and which is required to run some of these, all of these Java apps. So the problem is kind of like,
right?
I don't know. Yeah, we don't need to rehash it.
So in my post that I would encourage anyone to read, I make the argument that it's not actually anything wrong with Java per se. The problem is that as a development community, we haven't communicated what the solutions we build are, right? Right now, and this happens a lot of biz dev folks kind of think we're like the Ronco Cook man. We build the solution, pay your X X amount of dollars up front and it'll sit there forever and be fine. That's really not the case. The truth is it's more like an automobile, right? It has to change, has to evolve with the times. You could even say, automobiles have to be updated to deal with new carbon standards. So does software, right, for security, to not pollute your servers, things like that. This
is beautiful.
Basically, my argument is we need to change the conversation. We're not giving you a prepackaged solution that you can just run away with.
It's not something you install once and then it runs forever and ever and ever.
Right. I think the line I use is it's not set it and forget it.
Yeah.
You need to care for it like a car is the analogy I use.
So it's interesting. I definitely would agree that there is this mentality in corporate America that you make an initial investment in something and they kind of consider software and things like that like a fixed asset almost. They buy it once and they want to run it. And I can't tell you how common it is. In fact, I would say it's so common that I have never gone into a company and they've not had some business important application that is years and years old that has a lot of patches and workarounds just to keep it running. I've never been in a situation where that hasn't existed. And they just don't get the concept of needing to bring it up to date, maybe support newer data formats. They don't understand that why is it now that it's been running for so many years, it runs slower? Why is the database so big now? I don't understand this. And there's not this continued relationship with the developer to add new features and, support new things.
Yeah, and it really, in a lot of those companies, software is a cost center, right? It's not a profit center.
Yeah,
all
exactly.
It's doing is costing them money.
Exactly. They look at IT like that a lot too.
Right, and I often wonder if there's a way that these companies could leverage their IT departments better and whatever contracted developers they're using.
That's how it should be done, in my opinion, is you work with your IT people to, identify what applications need that kind of continued support, and then they establish the appropriate contracts with the appropriate developers. But a lot of times what happens is the business decides as a whole that it needs to make this huge investment in a new software or new platform, and then it's sort of led by these uppers in the, maybe even if it's a small enough company, by the CEO, him or herself, and then just sort of mandated to IT what the conditions of the agreement are. And there's no kind of, there's no control in IT's hands there.
And it really gets nasty. So one of the things I often see is, and this is, I've seen it go both ways, right? I've seen .NET shops go to the open source stacks, Rails or Python or whatever, and think, their problem is .NET, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if they just switch their application from an ASP app to a Rails app or to a PHP cake app, that it will magically fix all their problems.
Right.
Which is, of course, not the case.
Right.
Additionally, and this is kind of a business problem. They know, even the more, shall we say, enlightened biz dev folks know that there's not going to be a magic bullet, but they want a fixed binding bid, even though they don't know what they really need.
Well, and they have pressures from their boss to have a budget. And I can spend X. This is what I pre-approved. Like my wife's business, all of their IT expenditures for the year have already been pre-approved, and they can't exceed it. So if they need a new laptop, well, if that's, luckily we might have added one extra fudge laptop to the budget. So there's no room for it.
There's no room. And what happens is when something goes down, they end up doing this weird, duct tape solutions that might work for a few months, but in a year or 2 years, they're going to spend another $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 redoing a brand new system because it's just not salvageable anymore.
And what will happen usually is scaffolding is built up around these applications to make them work, and the people that build that scaffolding or person that builds that scaffolding sort of becomes the holder of all of how that scaffolding has been assembled. And if he steps away for whatever reason, burnout, hit by a bus, lottery, then you hire somebody like me to come in and reverse engineer how the whole thing's set up, and you pay top dollar.
It's perfect, right? Because that happens with me too. When they have custom dev solutions, when the guy quits, within 6 months, they hire a contractor to bring in a new solution. And they're more willing to redo the whole thing because they just sit there cursing the name of the original guy.
Right. Yeah, and that's pretty much how you and I make our business. And if people would just be a little more forethoughtful about it,
we wouldn't have any work. So let's, you know what? Forget about it. No.
Moving on.
IT guys like crap. In fact, today is Martin Luther King Day. It's supposed to be a national holiday. Call him in. What the hell?
Yep.
Christmas, I hear, is a great day to upgrade your servers, too.
Make sure they're on salary, too. I don't want them getting OT for coming in on any holidays.
How about just eight crazy nights of Hanukkah? How about 8 crazy bugs a night? They can't go home until they fix it.
Here's what I always recommend is whenever the economy is bad, constantly remind your IT guy that they're lucky they have a job in computers in the first place because the economy's bad. That's a good way to. I always find that works.
I also think, and this is just my personal thing. Having mandatory working lunches is just fantastic.
Yeah.
Or scheduling your meetings at 5:30.
You know what?
Right.
You know what? Here's an IT game that all the IT guys, they talk about this online, but managers might not know this one. IT guys love this. Tell them that you totally are cool and understand if they need family time. And then if they need to leave like a half hour early one day for like, a family time thing, be really disappointed with them. And you'll at first, you'll think that's mean, but they actually love it. It's like a little joke. They'll go home and tweet about how great it was and how funny it was.
Oh, another thing is if they're in a different time zone, it's really important that you be pissed off when it's like midnight their time, but 9 o'clock your time and you're calling them and they don't answer the phone. It's really important to leave a nasty voicemail.
Also, boundaries are for quitters. Only closers get close. Call on the weekends. Call them on the weekends.
If they're religious, I say Sunday morning between like 8 and noon, best time.
Yeah, and maybe during church you just text them, but that's totally cool.
No, I say FaceTime during church because maybe the priest or the minister would like. Maybe he has some insight.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe God knows why the database table is messed up.
You're gonna need a prayer at that point.
Well, divine intervention. So anyone listening who takes this advice is awesome, and please write in.
Yeah, and let us know when you need our contracting services.
Yeah, I mean, me and Chris would be a dynamite team. Actually, He's got your IT, I've got your dev. He really just. Yeah. And my rates are totally reasonable, especially if I find out that you're crazy. So.
Right. Yeah, although then they eventually become a trouble client.
Oh, trouble clients.
Yes.
I'll have a war story in a few weeks.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that when you're doing emails in a database, do not put a 10-character limit on that field.
Wow.
Yep.
So, before we move on to the war story, I want to take a moment and remind folks that they can support the Coda Radio program by visiting our affiliates before they shop. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, scroll to the very bottom of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, and down there you'll see links for Amazon US, UK, the DE, and Netflix, and Newegg, and the Think Geek, and the Best Buys. If you grab our Chrome and Firefox extension, it automatically tags your shopping session without you having to think about it. Also includes support for Amazon Canada, which just recently added Prime, which if you're in Canada and you can get Amazon Prime in your area, I really recommend it. And also the Firefox extension gets updated with that stuff as well. And don't forget Code School if you're going to do yourself a little self-schooling on the internet, learning by doing. Go down to the bottom of our site, click on that Code School link, and then go check out Code School's great site where they have all kinds of high-fidelity training sessions available for your learning needs. And we get a little cut of that if you do that. So thanks to everybody who supports this show and the Jupiter Broadcasting Network by using our affiliate links. All right, Mr. Dominic, should we go into the war story? What do you think?
I think we should.
All right. So this bad mamma jamma right here was emailed in by Brian, and he starts off, "Hello, Michael and Chris. I work in a medium-sized development shop with about 20 developers working on what's essentially enterprise client-side app. I have always considered our process for releasing bug fix updates as being rather backwards and poorly executed." Now, surprise, surprise. Essentially, our head of QA will send an email one morning to all developers that the code is frozen. He will then do a build, test it for
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
Was the head of QA called Victor Fries? And did he have his doctorate?
You are frozen.
You're frozen.
Chill out.
Continue.
Code, chill out. All right. He will, Mr. Victor will then do a build, test it for 4 or 5 days, and then send an email to everyone that the code is unfrozen. During this frozen time, the developers are still expected to continue fixing bugs, but rather than check in their changes, that they're supposed to just sit on them, usually for several days until the unfrozen email is sent out. At this point...
Warm them up, yes.
Huh?
They're sitting on them to warm them up.
Like an egg.
Right?
They got to hatch it, yeah.
Okay, I like this.
At this point, a free-for-all of code check-in commences with all sorts of conflict and collision shenanigans. Surprise, surprise, right? That said, there is nothing physically restricting the checking in of code. If a developer doesn't see the freeze email or simply forgets after a few days, then QA unleashes their wrath on the poor sod. I'm sure you can see all sorts of problems with this joke of a build, test, release process, and I think that should be put in quotes. And I'm even a little embarrassed just describing it. I would like to offer some suggestions to my superiors about ways to improve this, and was wondering if you guys had any thoughts or suggestions. One, perhaps obvious idea, would be to switch to using Git, as we're still using this ancient CVS for source control. However, I'm still very much a novice with trying to learn it better in my spare time. How would you suggest to using Git in a way that could improve our build, test, release cycle? Do you have any other thoughts or suggestions to bring our release cycle up to a more sane and reasonable, not to mention modern process? Thanks for your thoughts, and thank you for the awesome show you do each week. Sincerely, Brian. Wow.
Okay, so there is just
that must be so frustrating. That must be so good job, Brian, putting up with that.
Yeah, I would be out the goddamn door.
I mean, that is just one of those things where it's like, this can be done better. It would be easier for everyone. It would make the job better. And it's like, why are we doing it the hardest way possible?
Yeah, so if you're weak on Git, it doesn't need to be Git. It could be any TVCS, but it sounds like you want to use Git anyway.
Well, that code school link might be one place to start.
And I think that's free still, right? The try Git thing.
Like the first course is free, yeah.
Yeah. But so, all right. So step 0 would be explain to QA that, if you're using a distributed system, you can have branches, and there could just be a staging or testing branch.
Yeah.
Right. And so instead of freezing everybody's work, you just don't merge into that branch until QA says you can.
Right.
And that solves your entire problem. Right. So you have, I'm just thinking of the tree off the top of my head, staging, dev, Chris Fisher / blah, 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 Dominic M / blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And then whatever further branching model you want. And that's it. I mean, literally solves the problem.
Do you ever have people that say, oh, I'm worried about hosting on GitHub because it's an external service?
So you don't have to host on GitHub to use Git. And additionally, Grey Wolf is saying CVS does have a branching system. Okay, I don't know how CVS works at all. My take is that this guy wants to use Git anyway. But so I'll give you an example, Chris. I'm hosting with a hosting provider just for my company website.
Uh-huh.
I got them to give me SSH on the server and installed Git on the server.
Oh, okay, there you go, yeah.
And I'm using it to deploy the site.
Yeah, nice.
You can throw Git on any box you want.
Sure.
If you just have an Ubuntu box or any kind of Linux box.
You can just throw it on an internal machine. You don't have to use it.
It's super easy. So I don't...
The Eighth Doctor says you could also use Git tags to mark freeze points.
You could, and that's a little more complicated. I think for an ongoing process, just having a branch that you merge into when it's time for QA would make it a little more streamlined. So let's say QA is every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, you all merge into this branch. There's going to be a number of solutions for this problem that are all going to be better than the current implementation. Because it sounds like, and I would say, Brian, the case you make to your boss is they're losing developer productivity because of all these merge issues.
Yeah.
Right. And they're literally wasting money.
In multiple ways.
Right. And it's causing unneeded friction with the QA department. But I think the money argument's where you're gonna see a little more traction.
And I wonder if there are mistakes being introduced to the process, and if you could point out how those would also be reduced.
Yeah, and I'd also wonder, it sounds like the organization QA and Dev are not friends. Should we say it that way?
I agree. So it sounds like there's some animosity there, but maybe rightfully so, just based on a really hokey process.
Right, and it seemed, and I would question any tech organization. So I have a very strange idea on QA. I feel like QA people aren't lower than developers, and they should in fact be good developers themselves.
Yeah, it's funny how you can really get if you get a great QA team together, they are generally really professionals at their job.
And a real QA professional isn't just a nitpicky sod, to use this British slang. So it sounds like that's what they're doing. So this might need to be a personnel change on both sides. Because one thing I can tell you, going into an organization as an outsider and trying to get them to change what is essentially a major process, not a good fight. Um, Chris, I don't know if you've ever had to do that, but
Yeah, it's almost easier if the owner of the process is the one who you're stepping in to help replace.
yeah, and usually, or yeah, or if you have some kind of backing from someone higher who can maybe get rid of the current owner of the process.
Yeah, but I would definitely say when I was younger, I would go in with a little bit more higher expectations of being able to whip things around and change
Yeah.
these things. And I now go for the much more subtle and practical result.
Well, so it also, it's interesting that they're using CVS. I don't know what industry he's in, but
He said it
it
was an,
sounds like,
remember he said it was like an enterprise type front end app.
yeah. So it sounds like I don't know how to say this nicely. Perhaps some dark matter developers, as Scott Hanselman calls them.
Probably doing Phoebe 6.
Oh no, I don't mean this in a negative way, but perhaps we're coding as a job for them, right? So they haven't, but it's not like something they really do as a hobby. So they haven't stayed up to date. And perhaps they're 30 years older than him, right? And they just know CVS because they've been using CVS, and they know this type of process because they've been using it, and they have families, and they don't listen to podcasts, they don't read blogs.
Right, this is their 9 to 5.
Yeah. And in enterprise, those are the majority of the people you're going to meet. And they're not bad people, and they're certainly not bad developers. They're very good.
Wasn't it on this show, like you point out, that the people who wrote the space shuttle code worked
Yeah.
9 to 5 jobs?
Right. And these aren't bad people. The only issue with them is that sometimes they get stuck in their ways because, they get up, they go to work, they leave. So if CVS has been working for 10 years and that QA process has been good enough for 10 years.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because, it's funny how much we're gleaning from this email. Like, he's probably younger than them.
He's definitely younger than them, or else he'd be able to force the issue more.
Yeah, that's also another thing, too.
So, I mean, that's why I said, you can use any DVS in addition, or Git, because I'm not sure if you just walk in with Git. It's a little too much of the new hotness right now.
Maybe we should give him some. How could he sell it? Like,
I would sell the
use
you're gonna
case,
have to-
like come up with a use case and a process, sort of like a rough draft of what a process could be, but leave room for stakeholders to put their opinion in.
I would think so. I would even say you could probably sell Mercurial easier than Git,
Oh yeah.
given that it's a little more similar to like an SVN, which I know is more related to CVS.
And he could also, sell the fact that switching to a new system will leave the old system intact. So, if they switch over and things are a little bumpy, they can just move right back to the old one, and it doesn't hurt it. Like as long as they switch back within a day or something. I mean, it's not like they're gonna nuke their CVS database in the process.
Yeah, so Brian, to be honest, a more realistic outcome of this isn't going to be a change in what they do in terms of technology. But if you can get the stakeholders to acknowledge that there is a problem, it can't get worse.
Or if CVS can do the
Yeah,
branching that.
if they can bend, or even just bend the way QA behaves, right? So maybe why is Q? It sounds like QA is taking the code out of source control. Can't you just compile them a build and give them that? I don't know what kind of development you're doing, or can't you just, if it's a web style project, can't you just spin up one more server and let them bang on that server and always keep it up to date for them?
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering why is QA even bothering with the source code at all? Or are they actually fixing the bugs? Because it sounds like they're just testing and then sending you a laundry list of things that don't work. So if that's all they're doing, they don't really need to be involved in the whole source code process. I would, if it's a exe or some kind of Windows app, I'd hand them just an exe. But good luck, because
It does seem like the QA is getting a little more involved than.
well, it depends, because that's the thing. QA is a little malleable, right? So in some organizations, QA is literally a dev team that fixes bugs. In others, they're just a bunch of testers who, reply back with basically a big old list of things they want you to change. So I think there's some wiggle room in this process to really figure out what is the minimum friction you need between dev and QA.
Uh-huh.
Because, and I hate to suggest this, but if it could just be a wall where you just chuck over a binary and they test it, even though that's not a very good and integrated process, that wouldn't freeze dev for a week, which sounds like what's happening, or which is what that is what's happening. So,
Yes.
Best of luck.
Q&A, yeah. Q&A quality assurance. I guess somebody's in the chat room pointed out that we hadn't defined what it meant.
Oh yeah, it's quality assurance.
Yeah, without the ampersand in the middle. All right. Well, great email, Brian. Thank you. And folks, those are great emails to send into the show. CoderRadio@JupiterBroadcasting.com, or use that contact link, and then just choose Coder Radio in the drop-down menu. I like that. So, do we want to kind of swerve over into sort of launch territory?
Let's do that.
Okay.
So, we're getting a few emails about folks who are trying to launch projects or like deploy apps or whatever. And a common question is, when do I know when to deploy?
When is it done, kind of a thing?
Right.
Okay.
So my thing is, if you're a small company or just a one guy kind of thing, it will never. If you wait to be 100% bug free and no performance issues, you're
never going to ship.
Yeah, you won't get to market fast enough, or you'll just never get to market. So my thing is, it's done when it's usable, and isn't so horrendous that you're guaranteeing yourself horrible reviews.
Minimum valuable feature. What was that term?
Well, minimum viable product. Yeah, so this is leading towards the lean startup style philosophy. Because in all honesty, most of the people emailing in are developing apps, right? They're developing mobile apps or web apps or things that are smaller in feature set. So speed is going to be an advantage for you. The other problem is, with the way software prices have gone, if you're doing this commercially, it may not be worth it from a monetary perspective to put in an extra 2 months of QA to catch 1 or 2 small bugs. Right. So when we say small bugs, we mean like UI glitches, not things that destroy data. Obviously, data bugs are severe. The other issue is I'm a big believer in alpha testing with some people and this is actually pretty common in my circle. There's a lot of designers. So sometimes they'll send me, this is a bug, when really it's, add an animation here. Like is it a bug or a feature? That's important, because you may look at your list of things to do before you do a 1.0 and find out these are actually additional features that I could just wait. Because if your one was a flop, maybe you don't even want to continue.
I think that's a good point to stress on, going back to the minimum viable product, but also if you have ideas, shipping updates in the app ecosystem, I hate to say that word, but being a developer who releases kind of a steady stream of updates is a great way to continue to gain exposure. So, hold features back. Yeah. Hold features back and then work on them, get them just right, and ship them later. Figure out what you could maybe strip away.
Right. Which reminds me, CodeJournal just had an update. But of course, if you bought it from the App Store, you're still screwed.
Ouch. And now, how many are they behind on the App Store?
I think they're now 4 versions behind. Or they're point releases, but yeah, 4.
They just don't have anybody approving Mac apps, I guess.
So actually, this last one did get rejected last week.
Oh, yeah? For what?
They didn't like that the support address was my just generic company support, which was weird.
What do they want?
They want each app now to have their own support page.
Wow.
Yeah. So to redirect it to codejournalapp.com, which is what I'll use instead, I have to do the process again, which is amazing.
Well, and then it waits again, or do you think it'll fast?
It waits again. It's a little strange, and I don't quite understand why that matters, considering it has all the contact info and the icon, but it's okay.
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed, having worked at Apple for a few years now, is because this support has been in there from the 1.0. A lot of it depends on the reviewer you get, right? Because a lot of these guidelines are open to interpretation.
So this has never been an issue before.
This has been in there since launch. It's never been an issue.
It's interesting the amount of discretion they give their
Yeah, they have
employees.
a lot of discretion.
You
And
know,
it's kind of frustrating because the whole idea of having a catch-all support page would be then if there are future apps to advertise them right there, right? To have so then you know these are all our apps. Which one do you need support on?
huh?
But the most recent reviewer doesn't seem to approve of that. So
That's
yeah,
frustrating.
it's and that's one thing too. That goes right into when to launch. If you have to deal with some kind of third-party entity that can just slap you down, you should submit it as early as possible. Because if they're going to have issues you haven't thought of, it if they have some even silly arbitrary issue, better to fix it early, right, and not put yourself that much further behind.
And I'm not going to beat on this point too much. This is
Right.
probably the last time I bring it up. But again, if you pare down what your expectations and goals are, then there's less things for the reviewers to catch and flag.
Yeah, and to be honest, I even wish I had pared down some more functionality in apps I've delivered because it's really hard to rip something out after it's on the store.
Oh yeah, totally.
And this isn't just apps, right? So this is a web app or a website or anything. It's hard to deprecate functionality that people have paid for. Even if it doesn't quite work as intended or it can never be as good as you wanted it to be, it doesn't matter because the people who use it probably use it a lot. And they get very testy if you try and change it.
I've always found doesn't matter what the medium is or what the product is, nobody ever likes it when you take away something.
Right, even if they've never used the feature.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's I would release as early as possible because if it flops, right? And then you're done.
And you don't waste a ton of time.
And don't waste any more time.
That's a good point.
I mean, one thing I like to do is have you know, since most of the things I release are commercial, a minimum dollar amount where I'll continue updating it for the 1.0, right?
Okay, so you set yourself a goal.
Set myself a goal. And if you don't make the goal, maybe you do update it a few times and see where it goes, or you put it in maintenance mode. Because at some point, in the types of markets I'm in, and it sounds like most of the people writing in are in, the margins are very, very small, right? You're trying to make your money on volume. So if you're selling an app for like $5 or even $10 a license, you really need to sell a lot of them.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, one benefit, Chris, is that since I work as a contractor, time is essentially money. So it's really easy to say, how much have I lost doing this? Or how much have I made, or did I break even versus if I had taken on a consulting project?
Yeah.
And that's something I would encourage everyone to do. Because if there's really like real world metrics you can use, you'll be much better off in the long run.
You'll excuse me, I should go do some contracting work then.
Huh.
But I know what you mean.
Go buy CodeJournal. This last month hasn't been wonderful.
Yeah. It is tough because it's a tough line to walk because obviously I pursue endeavors that do not generate as much revenue as if I spent that same time contracting.
Yeah, and it's a lot the same for indie app development, right? Because it's a very bimodal thing. You're either a hit or a flop, which I'm finding on the desktop side is less true. So a lot of folks are actually doing okay on the desktop side. But
well, it depends. You know what? And this is probably kind of your next topic, but it depends a lot on your market. Because in the case of media production, our primary growth is through word of mouth. So people, when you tell other people about the show, that's essentially how the show grows. And that's a very slow, organic process because people don't do it enough. But the end result is over time, you sort of organically grow to a decent size. But with software,
totally different.
It doesn't, it's not like this, hey, I really enjoyed this show that I listened to. Here, you should check it out one of these times when you're on a commute or when you're kicking back. Software's not like that. That's not how you spread software. So you really kind of, especially in the app stores, you're going to kind of know if your app's kind of fallen in the back catalog.
So that's the big thing. If this is one thing I've had to reevaluate myself. If you're not willing to invest in marketing at launch and you're going on one of these app stores, the algorithm is going to slap you down within 2 months.
Now, would marketing be just like sending out review copies, or what would you consider marketing?
Depends on who you are. The problem with sending out review copies is you have to know you might be better served not doing it in some cases.
Sure, sure.
Because if the reviewer is someone who would have bought it and doesn't have a huge following, there's no point, right?
I've seen it really work, though. I've seen...
No, it does work. You just have to pick your publications.
Yeah, yeah.
So, like, for instance, I'll use myself as an example. I don't know that sending a review copy of Code Journal to Alan Jude would be a great idea.
Oh, right.
Right. He's not a Mac guy, and he'll just be like, okay, great.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, MG Siegler would be wonderful, because if he said he liked it on Ars Technica, that'd be huge. But you have to understand that everybody and their brother is sending these guys review copies. So the odds of that of that real organic
process, the noise
happening
is too high. Yeah, you got to find the sweet spot. But if you are writing an application and you know your market pretty well, you might know who kind of covers it. Like, for example, distributions, when they get covered on Last, see a great bump from that, and then it kind of helps them spread, and they get covered on Distro Watch, and then they get covered on PC World, and there's a real organic growth effect there.
Well, so if you're covering a niche market like developers, it's a little easier, right? So, like, anybody, if you're developing a developer tool, you can send me a review copy if you want. You can send it to Chris. He'll play with it.
Yeah.
And if we like it, we could talk about it. And I'm nice enough that if I don't like it, I won't say anything. Well, because that's the big nightmare of the review copy, right? Guy decides to review it and then says, gee, this is really,
yeah,
not good.
Yeah.
But the real risk is if you're a more mass market product, if you're a more generic product, it's going to be a lot harder to get those reviewers, right?
Yeah.
The other issue about knowing your market, unfortunately, if you're going to mobile's pass-fail, right? You're either going to do really well or make no money.
It sure seems so. Of course, it doesn't, I don't know. We'll see how that plays out over the long haul.
So what was the figure? Like 95% of the revenue made on the App Store for iOS was made by only 25 publishers?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a theory anymore, right? There are metrics, there are figures.
I know. I'm just wondering, as Android devices continue to grow and computing continues to shift over to mobile, if maybe just the volumes will just. I think we're just seeing the beginnings, I guess is what I'm trying to say, of the purchasing volumes in these stores. So there could be room. There could be room for the baseline growth.
I think one thing we're also seeing is that the traditional way of selling software is showing its age, shall we say. It's a bit antiquated in terms of what, for whatever reason, what consumers want today. It's not to pay upfront a software license.
Well, let me ask you before you go down that path, because I just have one more question about knowing your market. And I'm just wondering because you actively blog, you actively tweet, you're actively on Google Plus, you do this show. Do you feel like, do you feel like those are important key elements in helping market your apps? Like, if you didn't have platforms, like, I don't know how I promoted these shows before Twitter. How the hell did people know when we were live? I have no idea how we did that. So that's been a huge platform just in terms of that basic message. And without if you can't just put something out there now without engaging in these areas, or am I wrong on that? Because it seems like that's a pretty key component.
I mean, I would say that I haven't done a great job of it. So
it's a lot of work. It's a pain in the ass too.
Well, it's not only that, right? I released a Mac app, but the only platform I'm on is really a very strongly anti-Apple platform. Right? I mean, if you want to really be like brutal robber baron, I probably didn't target that very well.
I don't know what you're talking about. We're using 2 Hackintoshes right now to record this show.
Oh yeah, and they love that. Let me tell you, just boys in Cupertino love when people do that.
Mr. Fisher, open up, Mr. Fisher.
Yeah, no, but it is important, right? And to be honest, all that blogging stuff and the tweeting stuff really was a necessity of the consulting business.
Oh,
not the direct apps or any of the other projects.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that helps in your contracting business, huh?
It does, because folks seem to read the blog when they're looking to start a contract.
I should think about that. Of course, I don't have time to do anything like that.
Well, you have the podcast, and The one problem with trying to do the whole celebrity developer thing that some other people have done to great success is that you end up having to be very vanilla and take no positions on anything if you really
Oh,
want to
interesting.
right? So you can't. I'll put it this way: it's a market limiting mood to criticize the App Store publicly.
Right. You mean because there's certain repercussions that might happen?
Well, it's just like the Linux community, the Apple developer community is pretty tight knit, and it would be like going on Canonical's forums and saying that all Mark Shuttleworth wants to do is be Steve Jobs, which I don't necessarily believe. I'm just saying it would have this.
There's actually quite a few people on the Ubuntu forums that do say that. Yeah.
But it's not within that many friends.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I'm following you.
So I have found that. So and this is way off topic, but the question is, when we started the show, am I using this as a platform or am I trying to be like a pseudo journalist? And I kind of went the journalist route, which means I've been, I think, more fair, but it's also been a little against my interests.
I do understand what you mean when you say that, because I've always, I've always looked at a lot of the shows as sort of documenting the state of the industry. That so even like, if this is crazy, but 15 years down the road, these files are still out there, maybe on archive.org or maybe Jupiter Broadcasting is a huge, massive network. It will be very interesting because we're going to get such a very clear snapshot of time. These episodes run through this channel of time, and we are documented as we go. So it kind of, you almost fall into a little bit of commentary and journalism, just in a sense, because there is in the back of my mind, this is sort of preserving the history of what happened here.
And that's kind of the route I've taken with my blog as well. And unfortunately, the problem with honesty across the board is that no one's going to like you.
Yeah.
Right. The Apple folks feel I am just, bitter and jealous and overly harsh on them.
One thing that the one way I can relate with you is I've taken a lot of heat for kind of a negative stance against Og Theora and WebM. I just think they're crap.
Fair enough.
People who watch the Linux Action Show that are all about open formats and open standards and open source, they really don't like it when I criticize it. They'll link me to all of the research papers they want that kind of back up their position, but I can sit here and I can actually encode the files, and I know what's the superior. I know that H.264 is superior, and they don't like that I prefer that.
Yeah, and I've certainly gotten a lot of flack for my, let's say, questioning of the Ubuntu Software Center. And we didn't cover them in the feedback, but there were a few emails like,
like we're kind of picking on them a little bit.
The numbers are what the numbers are, and what was it, like 174 downloads for the second best-selling app on the store?
Yeah, 177 or something like that.
Right. So I don't think it would be fair to say, oh, well, that's just a slow start. It's been how many months?
Well, now years.
Yeah, years. And it's not performing. And, that is what it is. But, yeah, and I could see how that could easily happen to you too, Chris, because I've even, it's tough, right? Because nerds are very tribal.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't be a Mac guy and not be all in. Or you can, but it's hard. You can't be a Linux guy and then run a Mac.
It's hard to be a pragmatist when there's very strong people. There's a large group out there that tie their identity to the things that they sort of get attached to. And I think when you sometimes tread on that a bit, you are essentially treading on life choices they feel they have made. And sometimes people even go as far as aligning philosophical, views with it. And so, you push against something raw, and we sometimes see that. And I'm not like with the canonical stuff. Like I wasn't trying to, because I got accused of, being a little harsh on the team, a small, because they're like, the circumstances, it's a small team, that they only have so many limitations, we're aware of some of these problems, we're trying to work on them, but, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not that I'm trying to come on the show and dog on them. I'm just trying to say this is an issue, and I am concerned by those numbers. In fact, I think I said last episode that it might be the most devastating statistic I've ever heard about Ubuntu.
So Zane in the chat gave us some updated data. That same app is now up to, I think it scrolled too quickly, but 284. It was 280 something.
384.
384. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's still piss poor, right?
Well, but that's Well, yeah. I mean,
Right.
okay. So what? Okay, that's about a month now. It's been in there, solid. Because it only been in there for 2 weeks the first time we got the 177 figure.
Yeah.
So okay, so that, you know, you figure that's been about another 2 weeks. So almost 400 downloads in 2 weeks at $2.99.
And you know what the other issue is? I think with these new app stores, developers are kind of being forced to be tied, almost like the old feudal system, right? To a platform, some where you have to follow the rules, and if you develop things using the APIs they want you to, you might be better off. If you do things they don't like, they're going to throw you out.
Well, don't you think that's a response to the fact that so many developers drug their feet for so many years when they were trying to move the platform forward, and so now they've swung to the other side and they said, "Well, screw you."
Oh
You
yeah, I mean, this was on like episode 3. We talked about it. All the bad things, or all the things that are perhaps not in our interests, we did to ourselves. We decided to have in the installation scripts the Google or Yahoo toolbars,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
We decided to be super aggressive with collecting user data. And now, the users have spoken, then the platform vendors have taken advantage and said, well, we've got to protect the user.
Anytime they can move in a way that is better
Right.
for them and also has a at least semi-reasonable argument that it's good for the consumer, they'll do it. That's Apple's. That is the number one way to figure out how Apple works.
I mean, it's not just an Apple thing, right?
No, it's a Google
They're
thing
all
too,
doing it. Apple just did it first.
and Microsoft does it, and we'll see what
Microsoft's doing
Canonical
it.
does. Yeah, I mean Canonical
Canonical,
does it to an extent with the Ubuntu
Canonical
software.
is doing it, but they're having a hard time. And I think that's, I actually like what Canonical's trying to do. I just think they moved a little too quickly. They weren't ready.
Well, and it's not really been since Ubuntu 12.04 that they've kind of had a nice steady flow of like recognizable apps. Before then, it was kind of static, never really changing for what you could buy. And it's definitely stepped up. I go in there every week. I see something new for purchase. And for a little while, I was almost buying something a week. I'm buying something a month at this point because there's just not a ton of stuff that's grabbing my interest.
I mean, once they can get it to where you can, do the Ubuntu update and not have to resubmit your apps, I think that's one of their larger problems.
I might have been slightly wrong on that, but I'm not. I was told I was wrong on that. However, I have apps that I bought under 12.04 that I can't install under 12.10 because of compatibility reasons. So I was told I was wrong, yet that's happening to me. So
Well, it might just be the Wild West nature of the Ubuntu store where you can use any dependency you want. So maybe, having a blessed stack will fix this problem for them.
yeah, yeah. And I bet that blessed stack will have. Yep.
I'm sorry, cute for the pedantic folks in the audience.
Yes. So I find it's interesting because then again that goes back to your market. In that situation, if you're selling to Linux, you'd really have to evaluate Ubuntu Software Center over selling direct on your website and trying to package it for several distributions.
Well, I would say that's not just an Ubuntu problem, right? So, because when you do direct and App Store, you've now cut let's just assume the split is 50-50 for volume. You've now cut your ranking the App Store in half with one shot.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest factors is, of course, purchases, downloads.
Right.
So it's a larger conversation, but I don't know. I mean, the App Store is certainly the path of least resistance for any of these platforms because they handle the payment processing, which is a pain in the ass. And you don't have to worry about, running a site that includes links to PayPal, or they do a lot for you.
Yeah.
It's usually the easier way.
And users, especially on the Mac App Store,
Yeah.
it is, as from an end user perspective, I really like, I can wipe a Mac, and then I launch the App Store, and this is true on the Hackintosh too, and you launch it, and then you just, here's all my purchases I've ever made, and you just go down the list and you go click, 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 and then within 20 minutes, all of my software is restored, and it has literally, with the Final Cut and the Pro applications, gone from a 2-day setup process to a 20-45 minute, just however long it takes to download and install process. I mean, it's from an end user perspective, it's kind of great that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot good about these app stores, and I think I don't mean to be too hard on them. It's just kind of, you have to understand that you're making a deal when you go into the app store. Any app store, not Apple's app store.
Right. Oh yeah.
Which, by the way, they lost that lawsuit.
Right.
Yeah. So app store is a generic term.
Yep. Thank goodness.
Oh, one note someone told me, and that I did look up, and turns out to be true. If you put your Android app in the Amazon store,
Uh-huh.
you can't pull it from the store if it's in Google Play without pulling it from Google Play, according to their terms.
Now, how can they enforce that?
I don't know how they enforce it.
That sounds like a no way. Did somebody send that into us?
No, I actually heard it from somebody else, and then I looked it up, and it turns out to be true.
Holy camole.
Oh, and they can change the price of your app.
Yeah, I knew that. Even as free.
Which you're no longer paid for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the idea is you get market share.
Which is not great when you need every dollar you can get if you're small.
So. I suppose so. Well, any other thoughts on the whole launch?
No, let's wrap it up.
All right, man. All right, there we go. Well, folks, if you have a question for Mr. Dominic, or myself, I suppose, although I wouldn't imagine what, email us coderradio@jupiterbroadcasting.com or use that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, and then select Coder Radio from the drop-down menu. But, Mr. Dominic, where should folks find you throughout the week?
You should find me at dominic.com and @tumadugo on Twitter.
There you go. And we have links to his blog and his all various profiles, as well as mine, in the show notes. Don't forget, Coder Radio is live on Mondays at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, over at jblive.tv and jblive.info for the audio stream. And then we're out Monday afternoons over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And thanks to everyone who rates and reviews us on iTunes. That helps other people find the show. And we need everyone out there who is using iTunes to do it, because there's not too many of you. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you right back here next week.